We're now going to take you live to Sydney, where the Prime Minister Anthony Albanese is speaking.
One is to have annual meetings between our economic ministers and our international ministers. When we say our economic ministers, that includes climate change, so our Treasurer and climate ministers, working on ways in which we can benefit from the innovation that will occur with the shift to clean energy economies in our respective nations. In foreign affairs and also defence issues, there'll be annual meetings there as well, and we look forward to next year's discussion at leadership level, which of course will be the 40th anniversary of the closer economic relations agreement between Australia and New Zealand. We worked together on ways in which we have a seamless transition. We don't want people to be temporary residents forever, and what we'll do is we'll work on ways of a pathway to citizenship with a timeline of Anzac Day 2023. We know that there have been a range of issues raised relating to citizenship, and we think those pathways and working through these issues so that people get more rights that are more consistent, whether it be Australians who have moved to New Zealand or New Zealanders moving to Australia. We want to work through these issues with all the implications that are there for full participation in our respective societies. One of the issues that we'll look at as well unilaterally in Australia is in New Zealand, if you're an Australian who's been resident for a year, you have voting rights in New Zealand. You're able to participate fully in those processes. So as part of the normal review process that occurs after a federal election in Australia, we'll be asking the Joint Standing Committee on Electoral Matters to consider whether there's a way to return to systems that have existed in the past of giving New Zealand people who are here in Australia, contributing to society, paying taxes, working, voting rights here in Australia as well. We won't preempt those processes, but it is, I think, a really common sense position to at least examine over coming months. We look forward to working together next week at the Pacific Island Forum as well. We need to engage with our Pacific Island family, which we are both a part, and engage on issues of climate change, engage on issues of security, including maritime security. We have stepped up our increase in aid that we will provide as part of the election commitments that we've made. We made a comprehensive plan for the Pacific, and it is obviously a stronger plan if we look at ways in which Australia and New Zealand can work together. And next week I look forward to working cooperatively, not just with Jacinda, but with the sovereign nations of the Pacific when we meet together in Fiji.
Thank you very much, Prime Minister Albanese. And kia ora koutou katoa, ngā mihi nui kia koutou. Thank you for the chance to come together and conduct a bit of a debrief on what was a really positive bilateral engagement between New Zealand, Australia and some of our respective cabinet ministers. It was particularly auspicious for us to be here during NAIDOC week, and I do want to acknowledge the First Nations people of Australia and the fact that the Indigenous relationship between our First Nations people has been a core part of not only our trade mission that we've undertaken here in Australia, which has been very successful, but also the ANZLF, which has been happening over the past 2 days. And it was a feature of our bilateral discussions today. It's fair to say there's a lot that we can do together to further economic development amongst our First Nations people, as well as the exchange of ideas around furthering relationships there too. It has been a very successful few days for us here in Australia, across Melbourne and Sydney as part of our trade mission. It's really highlighted to me the depth of our economic relationship, but the depth of our relationship generally. And Prime Minister, I felt that very much reflected in the themes that we discussed and the common ground and the shared values that we have. In the last meeting, we described it as an opportunity for a reset in the relationship. And it felt to me today that we've established a work program now that brings to life that reset. And I want to thank you for that. First of all, you have now the commitment from both sides that we will have formal annual bilateral engagement between our Ministers of Foreign Affairs, Defence, Finance and Climate Change. And I don't underestimate the value and importance and signal of the fact that we have brought the climate portfolio into those annual bilateral exchanges, because it's so obvious to us that there are ways that we can work together, not only between New Zealand and Australia, but together in the work that we want to do within our own region of the Pacific to play our part and step up our role. Australia is already the source of significant direct investment into New Zealand around everything from waste management to hydrogen, to wind and renewable energy generation. And here, I think that there's a role for us to play in exchanging ideas as we look for innovative solutions to the climate challenges. We also discussed, as the Prime Minister has already acknowledged, the place in Australia of New Zealanders. We've long argued that New Zealanders are Australia's best migrants. And I don't say that lightly. It's borne out by the facts and what they contribute as taxpayers, which is a step above what you'll see in the tax contribution from others. And our ask has been for there to be a greater acknowledgement of the role that New Zealanders play here in Australia. The fact that we have, and you'll see this in our communique, agreement that no New Zealander or Australian should be rendered permanently temporary. That is a step change in the way that we've previously seen New Zealanders treated here. If you look at the census, New Zealanders tend to translate into citizenship at a rate of about 30%. For other nationalities in Australia, it's closer to 60%. So that demonstrates some of the barriers that exist, and we've had a commitment to work through those issues together, and we've set ourselves the ambitious timeline of having those proposals in time for Anzac Day 2023. So I think that demonstrates the commitment we have to that piece of work. We also talked at some length about the Prime Minister's recent visit to Ukraine. That was something I was very eager to hear from him. I was unable to visit, but before Prime Minister Albanese visited Kiev, we did discuss how beneficial it would be to us in New Zealand if we were able to lean in on the experience and feedback that he had from that direct dialogue with President Zelensky. And we've been talking about how we might be able to work together in the region in the future, particularly around rebuild and reconstruction. So thank you, Prime Minister, for your generosity in sharing those outcomes. Obviously, we go into the Pacific Island Forum with a full commitment to the Pacific as our region, eager to hear from our neighbours around how they see the geostrategic issues facing our region presently, what role we can play on the number one issue for our region, which is climate change, and equally, how we can further strengthen the architecture around the Pacific Island Forum as a place that we bring issues like, for instance, security-related matters. I look forward to the chance to continue that exchange and meet with our counterparts shortly. But otherwise, thank you again, Prime Minister. A very fruitful discussion in all accounts.